marks the spot. Have you ever dreamt of finding a treasure map that, if followed precisely, would lead you to a gaggle of hidden riches? Today I want to take you on a journey using a treasure map that we find throughout the Old Testament. But this treasure map doesn't point us to gold and silver, but to something infinitely more valuable, to someone who's infinitely more valuable. In fact, because of who he is and what he's done for us, he has become our only hope. After all, as we'll see today, this treasure map leads us to the one God promised in Genesis chapter 3:15, to his Christ, to his Messiah, who would one day lift us from our fall, restore to us a right relationship with him, and reestablish God's righteous reign upon the earth. Today we'll see that this treasure map God gives us throughout the Old Testament, leading to his Messiah, points to none other than Jesus of Nazareth. We saw last time from Genesis chapter 3 verse 15 that God's Messiah would come through the offspring or seed of the woman, that is, through a female descendant of Eve. Soon after this foundational promise, God begins filling in the details his people would need to recognize the Christ when he finally came. For example, after Adam and Eve's evil son Cain killed his righteous brother Abel in Genesis chapter 4, Adam and Eve had a third son, and Eve named him Seth, which means appointed one, believing that Seth would take up the righteous cause of her murdered son Abel, and that he would either be the Christ or that the Christ would come through him. Confirming Eve's intuition, after Seth's son Enosh was born, we read that people began to call upon the name of the Lord. And from that point on, we see a clear distinction between Cain's evil descendants and Seth's godly descendants, ensuring that the promised Messiah would come through the godly line of Seth. Not surprisingly, Genesis 9 implies that the Christ would come through Seth's descendant, Noah, who had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. But in Genesis 9:26, as Noah blesses the Lord, he refers to God as the God of Shem, who would continue the godly line of Seth and whose descendant Abraham would become the father of the Jews, through whom would come the Christ. Look at this important passage in Genesis chapter 12, where God says to Abram, he hadn't yet changed his name to Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you, Abraham, into a great nation," referring, of course, to the nation of Israel. And this implies that God would give Abraham an offspring, a seed. In you, verse 3, God says to Abraham, that is, through your offspring, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, how could Abraham's offspring bless all the nations? Well, as the New Testament apostle Paul confirms in Galatians chapter 3, Abraham's specific offspring, Jesus Christ, God's Messiah, would destroy the works of the devil, conquer the power of sin, and make all things new. All right, let's pause for a moment to consult our treasure map to the Christ so far. As we've seen that the Christ would come through the seed of the woman, the godly line of Seth, and the lineage of Shem. We've also seen that he would be a descendant of Abraham. As the story continues unfolding in Genesis, God's promise to Abraham is confirmed to Abraham's son Isaac and to Isaac's son Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Now, Israel, or Jacob, had 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, which God had promised to Abraham would come through him. And in Genesis chapter 49, God makes it clear that the Messiah, that is the Christ, would come through the kingly tribe of Judah. For as Jacob, or Israel, blessed his 12 sons, when he came to his son Judah, he said prophetically of him, "Judah, your brothers, that is, all the other tribes of Israel, shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Then in verse 10, Jacob, that is Israel, makes a remarkable prediction about his son Judah and the tribe of Judah, saying that the scepter, that is the king's scepter, shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until tribute comes to him. Or as the Hebrew canon perhaps should be translated here, until tribute comes to the one to whom it belongs. That is, to the Messiah, who would come through the seed of the woman, the godly line of Seth, and the lineage of Shem, as a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through the kingly tribe of Judah. Well, then, hundreds of years later, confirming that God's Messiah would be king over his restored kingdom on the earth, God tells King David, as he ruled over Israel, that one of his royal descendants would reign on his throne forever. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. God says to David, "When your days, David, are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom." And of course, God is referring here to David's son, Solomon. "He shall build a house for my name," that is, a temple, which is exactly what Solomon did. But then God promises to David, "I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." But we know that Solomon died, which means that one of David's future descendants would reign over God's people forever, which is why the term son of David became for the Jews synonymous with the coming Messiah, the Christ God had promised throughout the Old Testament, the one who would lift us from our fall, restore to us a right relationship with God, and ultimately reestablish God's righteous reign upon the earth. The one whom we've seen would come through the seed of the woman, the godly line of Seth, and the lineage of Shem. As a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he would come through the kingly tribe of Judah to sit on the throne of David forever. Significantly, Matthew's genealogy of Jesus claims that he was born of a virgin, that is, of the seed of the woman, just as God promised all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. That he was also the son of Abraham and the son of David, who had come to save his people from their sins. No wonder, therefore, Jesus claimed that all the Old Testament scriptures spoke of him, that the entire Old Testament is really a treasure map pointing to him, the promised Savior King. In the next two videos, we'll consider what it means that Jesus Christ was both Savior to a fallen world and King over God's kingdom he came to restore. But for now, even just based on the few scriptures we've looked at today, I wonder how you're beginning to answer the question that Jesus calls his disciples to answer in Matthew chapter 16, when he says, "Who do you say I am?" I'm John Mitchell, and this is Theotokos.